Okay, welcome back to the channel. Hobby1 Kenobi here. Today we are going to tackle the next project, which is the SU-25, also known as the Frogfoot. And this is a kit by Zvezda. This is 1/48 scale. And I have to tell you, this is a kit I've been wanting to build for a while now. I've always loved the old monogram kit, and just when Zvezda came out with this kit, it's been on my radar and something, I really wanted to tackle. Just love the history of this aircraft. I love the style of the aircraft, the paint job, everything about it is just really cool. So we're gonna go ahead and tackle it. And as you can see, you got the box here. I went ahead and took out all of the sprues already. Rather than doing a formal in-box review, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right in and start working on the kit, and we'll kind of do a review as we go along here. All right, so we've got the instructions here. I've sort of called out some of the specific colors we're gonna need. The reason I've got all this paint on here is, well, I was trying to blend some colors together to get just the right kind of interior blue. And I had to be really careful about this because I need to have it blend well with these 3D decals. Now this set is by Quintus Studios. And in my previous videos and in the past, I've worked with the Edward Zoom 3D decals, but I found those to be quite pixelated. So I'm excited about working with these. These look to be much higher quality of print. I decided to start with the blue that they called for in the instructions here. For the Tamiya paints, it is XF18, and this is really dark and did not match the 3D decal set. So I needed to blend, and I'm gonna put the ratio and the particular paints that I used up on the screen here. However, a note of caution, even after all the work that I put in, when it dried, it still did not match as well as I had hoped. Rather than go with the kit supplied ejection seat, I decided to go ahead and get an aftermarket seat from Quick Boost. For my reference, I'm going to use this Concord Publications book. They have a lot of great color photos. There's a lot of wonderful information. There's some fairly good interior shots as well as exterior shots. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I wanted to have a look at the control panel, and specifically here the top portion of the control panel. As you can see, this is very thick. And looking at my references, there should be a very thin line, almost sheet metal thin part here. And this is a very common place to do a little bit of extra detailing on really any aircraft kit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this X-Acto knife and I'm just going to carve it down and scrape off as much plastic as I can. And now that I've got the piece fairly thin, I'm going to come at it with a sanding stick. You can of course use a file, but I find that sometimes files can be a little bit too aggressive. And there we have it. So now here I've got some of the parts painted, and I've got a nice gloss coat on them so that they're ready to accept the wash. I went ahead and painted the control panel black. I did some fine dry brushing to bring out some of the details. I also started to paint the seat here and also painted some of the details on the seat as well. So now we're going to start adding a wash to the color. And I've got some turpenoid here and a mixture of, we're going to have a mixture of some black, a little bit of white to make a gray, and add just a touch of brown to add a little bit of that grimy look to it. All right, let's take some of the oil and just go ahead and slather it on, getting into the crevices. And I'm going to use this as both a way of bringing up details, sort of deepening shadows, as well as representing grime and just general weathering. So now that the wash has dried, we're going to come at it with a Q-tip, and I'm going to leave just a little bit of it on here. The reason why I added the wash on the sidewalls is not to bring out any detail. As you can see, there simply isn't any detail, but it's really to give it a similar tone as the rest of the cockpit. And as you can see here, I'm trying to see if the tone matches that with the 3D decals. It's fairly blue still. The wash has darkened it a little bit, and I'm hoping that with a flat coat, the richness of the blue will be reduced a bit. And now that the bucket seat is dry, we're going to go ahead and again remove most of the wash, hoping that some of it stays in some of the crevices. Okay, finally all of the parts have received a flat coat, and now I'm ready to apply these 3D decals for the control panel and sidewalls. So we're going to start with the control panel here. I'm going to use microcrystal clear to adhere the decal to the surface, and I'm going to dip it in water, but only briefly. I find that some modelers make the mistake of allowing the decal to sit in the water and soak, and therefore it has a hard time conforming and fitting into the place that it was designed to fit. The reason why we add water to these decals really is just to remove it from the backing. So I'm just going to dip it in the water just for a while, just mere seconds, and then start to move the decal away from the backing paper. Once I've done that, we are going to want to actually dry the decal fairly quickly. I'm going to use microcrystal clear to adhere the decal to the surface. Another thing that I find modelers do is that they load up on the glue, and really we just need a little bit, a thin layer, and the wetness of the decal should activate the glue nicely and allow it to stick fairly strong. So I'm going to start to apply the glue here and really just not use a whole lot and just try to get a nice thin even layer. And now we're going to do the same with the control panels on the sides. Now I'm going to use a slightly dampened brush to remove any of the excess glue. Yes, the glue does dry clear, but there's no reason to leave any remnant of it. Just wipe it away, it comes right off. As you can see, we're continuing work on the SU-25 by Zvezda, and I've installed the cockpit at this point and glued the fuselage halves together, and the vehicle is fitting really well. Everything's going in together nice and smoothly. I've got the Quinta Studios 3D decals. I decided not to use the decals for the red ejection seat handle. I made these out of thin wire and then painted them. I will say one thing about the detail of the scribing at the top of the vehicle. Because there's a curvature, it seems as if some of the detail is not as crisp as the other scribing on the rest of the kit. So you might consider sanding this down and rescribing it if you can get a finer, more crisp look to it. I think I'm going to leave it on this vehicle. As you can see, the tail has not yet been glued. I wanted to ensure that the fins are aligned properly once things get together. So I went ahead and painted the bottom wheel well here for the front. I need to get this painted up and ready to go so I can attach the landing gear before other bottom fuselage parts are connected. I added some weights to make sure the front stays down. And there's a seam along the middle here. You're going to want to make sure that you don't fill that in. That needs to be there. Next up, looking at the tail, there are these holes that on the port side are correct, but on the starboard side need to be filled and reset. They're in the wrong position, so I just went ahead and drilled those out. Next, we're looking at the intakes. Rather than deal with the seams all at different times, I decided to attach the front lip of the intake as well as the inner wing portion. That way I could deal with all of the seam work at one time. It was pretty easy to take care of with some sanding sticks and a little bit of CA glue. I did need to paint the intake, so that color needed to be figured out very early in the process. And as you can see here, I've got the fans for the engine, and they've been painted and received a wash. So in a little bit, I'm going to attach them to now the painted intakes. All of these steps should be done before you attach the intakes to the vehicle. It's going to be much harder to paint everything down the road. So now I'm going to attach the fans, and we're going to use some Tamiya extra thin cement. Just a few little drops will do it. For the color of the inside of the intakes, I mixed some Tamiya colors. I did about 8 milliliters of XF2, which is a white, and just a few drops of green and a few drops of blue. And this gave me just the right color, checking against my references. Dealing with the color, you're going to need to figure that out ahead of time. So you're going to need to decide which vehicle you're going to do ultimately, because there is a light blue color and a light gray color. So you need to match the inside of the intakes, which is the color of the bottom of the aircraft. I decided to go with an Afghan War vehicle. These two at the top here were both involved in the Afghan War. I decided to go with this sort of tan and brown color. So for that one, I needed the lighter gray color. Now I'm going to attach the intakes to the fuselage, again using Tamiya extra thin cement. And I've got some clamps that I absolutely love, and I'm going to use these to hold the intake against the fuselage as the glue dries. If you're building this model for the quality of, say, contest, you're going to want to take care of the seam on these intakes on the outer part. These will be seen if a judge were to pick the vehicle up and inspect inside the intakes. There's also a pin mark that I would recommend taking care of as well. It's just this one right here. Next, I started to attach the walls of the wheel well, and these went on really nicely. Again, just a couple of drops of Tamiya extra cement took care of them nicely. Then I sprayed Tamiya black in the recesses and did some light coats of this yellow and green mix of Tamiya paints. Then I used my favorite gloss from Mission Models and prepared the model for the actual wash. So for the wash, I like to use Winsor & Newton paints. These are artist oils, and they are thinned with terpenoid. And for this color, I just mixed some black and some white and a little bit of brown to make this sort of shadow, dirty, weathered effect. I ended up spending a lot of time and a lot of detail in this area, only to find later that much of it is obscured by the rest of the fuselage once everything goes together. So I would recommend not spending too much time detailing all of this up as I had. Finally, I painted the landing gear in a light gray, also sprayed a gloss, let it dry, and now I'm applying the wash to the landing gear. And in the next video, we will remove much of the dried wash so you can see what it looks like with all the shadows. This will be the last video before painting commences, so a lot will be packed in. And stay tuned until the end of the video to see the model just before it heads to the spray booth. In the previous video, I applied a wash for the struts, and the wash has now dried. I am removing most of it on the surfaces while leaving the rest to collect in the recesses. This is done with a paintbrush and Q-tips. The same wash was applied to the wheel wells and is now being removed again with a Q-tip and a paintbrush. The weathering effect seen in these photos was achieved by adding spots of white, burnt umber, black, and blue oil paints. The paints were applied randomly, then blended with a dry paintbrush. The black scuffing and chipping effect was achieved with a fine-tipped brush. Next, I will remove the seam line along the top of the fuselage with a flexifile. Sanding sticks are used to touch up seam work on the external fuel tanks. I decided the pylons needed more details, so I cut off small circles of plastic from plastic rod and attached 8 pieces at the bottom of each pylon. Then I added 8 small strips of rod that would protrude out from the top of the pylons. It is also important to clean up the leading edge of the wings and the vertical stabilizers. Next, my references showed a square box-like structure in the nose of the aircraft, presumably some sort of camera. I decided to depict this with strips of plastic. The square box shape is then attached to the vehicle. Finally, here's the vehicle before it is to be painted. I will point out one error that I have made at this point, and that is that the vertical stabilizers are actually upside down. I did remove them later on and fix them into the right position. Do be sure that they come up a bit like a V instead of sloop down. The SU-25 by Zvezda is now at the painting stage, and as you can see, portions have been masked using Tamiya tape and a bit of paper towel. The windscreen and canopy have been masked by cutting small strips and squares of tape, then meticulously placing them around the clear portions. In some cases, curves were cut to match the contours of these pieces. The masks were applied to both the exterior and interior of the clear parts. If this seems too tedious for you, pre-cut masks are certainly available. If you use the method I did but do not want to mask the interior, you can spray the interior color from the outside first, then spray the exterior color. The first layer of color will be seen from the inside, albeit with a glossy sheen from the clear part. A good interior color is typically black, but my references for this aircraft show a medium green or the light blue-gray cockpit color. I will often mix my own colors. I love using Tamiya paints. They are easy to get, they're available from my favorite online shops, and are very strong. I prefer to use Mr. Color Thinner, but the Tamiya X20A works quite well. The ratio for paint and thinner is roughly 1:1. The properties of Tamiya paint are closer to solvent-based paint rather than true acrylic, though I understand that water can be used in a pinch. I like to stock up on these hexagon glass jars found on Amazon, and will throw a small stainless steel mixing ball to help mix up the paints. The underside of the aircraft received this light blue color. I remember in the 80s and 90s this color being called duck egg blue. This color uses first a lot of white with just a few drops of blue and green. I would recommend adding a drop of each to the white, then mixing the colors, then adding another drop and mixing it until you achieve the right look. The tan color is 4 parts Tamiya buff with 1 part brown. Next I mix the dark brown color, and the ratio of the colors is listed here. In this video, everything looks quite crude. This is really just the first layer of paint, and as you can see there's quite a bit of overspray, which will be cleaned up later, and I will show you that in the next video. Alright, so that brings us to now some of the flaws of this kit. I did point out in an earlier video that the tail portion had some molding that was incorrect. So you're going to want to adjust that. It was a fairly easy fix, and go ahead and check out one of my earlier videos to find that. The next thing I do want to point out is that I had a lot of problems with the wheel struts. They were just fragile and consisted of a whole lot of pieces and just constantly broke. I would recommend getting an aftermarket metal set. I believe Scale Aircraft Conversions makes them. I would highly recommend investing in some of those. Outside of that, the kit was really superb. I did get some aftermarket resin wheels, which I'll be adding to the vehicle to give it that sort of weighted look. The kit wheels do look a little bit strange, but otherwise, you know, this kit could very easily be built right out of the box. Okay, here I am mixing a dark gray wash. The wash is applied to all surfaces of the vehicle. The colors on the aircraft were all mixed to create a slightly lighter tone. This was done because the dried wash will ultimately darken any overall colors. As is typical for me, I begin with just a few lines, then realize it's best to just go ahead and apply the wash more liberally. Now comes the fun part, removing the wash. The wash has been allowed to dry. The thinness of the wash determines how fast it will dry. More terpenoid means that the terpenoid evaporates quickly, while more pigment allows for better coverage of color. As with most things, there is a trade-off. This coat of wash dried in about 20 minutes. You just want to make sure you don't see any shiny patches. If you begin to remove the wash before it is dry, paint will not stay in the crevices. To remove the wash on the upper surfaces, I will use Q-tips, an old brush, and paper towels. The paper towels are great for removing large amounts of excess pigment. The brush is used to spread and distribute the wash, flowing it to gather it really in the tight corners and scribe details. The Q-tips are used to wipe away smaller amounts of wash, allowing for better precision. Be ready, however, to stock up on Q-tip boxes. I like to get mine in bulk from Costco. Finally, a moment I both love and dread, removing the tape used to mask the clear parts of windows. I tend to have good luck with Tamiya tape, but occasionally a small section will not be fully covered or tape has been placed slightly askew. have found that unwanted paint can generally be easily removed using a very simple tool, a toothpick. The wood of the toothpick is unlikely to scratch any of the plastic. I like to wet the toothpick slightly to add a bit of grip once it finds the paint. Well, now it's time for weathering, and I will continue to use oil paints. I will use shades of the base color as well as pure white and black. As you can see, I will add drops of color, then spread it around with a brush or Q-tip. This effect produces off-color patches which add to the realism of a paint scheme. This effect also mutes the vibrant and sometimes unnatural look of decals. I will also flick heavily thinned color to add random spots more quickly. The nice part about using oil paints is that even though I am placing them on a flat coat, they are still relatively easy to move if I have overdone the effect. However, if you don't like the effect, you can go over with less aggressive shades of the base color, or even take out the old airbrush and shoot heavily thinned paint lightly over the offending area. I plowed through the build since the last video. This always happens. Once I get past the wash and the subsequent flat coat, the build moves quite fast. Of course, this wasn't without moments of difficulty. First, I really needed to get the front wheel strut and get all of the wheels on. I was very concerned about the fragility of the front strut, but the many attachment points provided enough strength. There's something about the Frogfoot that begs for correctly bulged tires, so I went ahead and got an aftermarket set. It just doesn't look right unless all of the bulk is represented by nearly flat tires. Then came the main wheel doors. This was one frustrating half hour. The sway braces for doors didn't want to fit at the angle the instructions called for. Next, I needed to get the 2 holes drilled for the front pivot tubes. These were also aftermarket and thankfully were fairly easy to install. I decided early on that I wanted to make a base for this model. I purchased a nice circular slab of wood from my local Michaels and used AK's Diorama concrete for the concrete slabs. Once dried, I sanded it down, and then I laid down some dark earth terrain from AK for the dirt patch and scribed lines for the grooves in the concrete. I spent some time scribing the occasional cracks found in concrete. Here, Shepard Payne's book, How to Build Dioramas, is ever present in my mind when making such bases. Static grass was placed on the dirt patch and white guidelines were made by making masks out of Tamiya tape. Well, here's the model in its completed form. That does it for this video and for this build. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit subscribe, please hit like, please feel free to comment and share, and I'll see you in the next video.